Welcome, everyone. We're so glad that you're here with us this evening. My name is Stacy Hoffman. I'm the founding ED of Living Jazz, and we're honored that you're here with us for our second Living Jazz call and response event entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? We'd love to know where you're tuning in from, actually, so feel free to let us know in the chat where you live. And let's face it, everyone, we are in the midst of the aftermath of an election. And our evening's topic could not be more relevant or auspicious, as each and every one of us wonder, where do we go from here? So first, I'd really like to tell you briefly about Living Jazz. We are an Oakland-based nonprofit music organization, and our mission is to transform lives through music. Over the last 36 years, we've designed and produced a multitude of jazz education and performance programs that serve elementary-age children through seniors. We currently produce 2 summer music camps entitled Jazz Camp West for teens and adults and Jam Camp West for 10 to 15-year-olds. We provide free music education for Oakland low-income public elementary schools through the Living Jazz Children's Project. We produce Oakland's only non-denominational musical tribute to Dr. King every year entitled In the Name of Love. And we produce the Bay Area's only jazz talent search event entitled Jazz Search West. Since the start of COVID-19, we created the Pickup Sessions, which brings live music safely to people standing in long meal lines, waiting for food and waiting for essential services in Oakland. As Living Jazz continues to navigate the pandemic by producing programs online like this one, we understand that COVID-19 is going to continue to keep us from being able to produce the live events we know that our community relies on for many, many months to come. So we've just launched a See Us Through campaign. And this campaign has a goal of raising $75,000 through the end of 2020. We just launched it, and we've already raised over $8,000, so we're well on our way, thanks to you. The Living Jazz Call and Response Series is a very exciting part of our efforts, and we know that the loss of live music is devastating. It's devastating for our community, but we also understand that our most influential music makers are working hard to find a pathway through these challenges that we're all facing by integrating their perspectives, their experiences, and their creativity into their artistic expression. Today, we're honored to hold the second in our call and response series with Wynton Marsalis, moderator Andre Kimmy Stone, guest, and host Frank Barrett. Our next call and response is entitled Monk Talks Monk. This will be Saturday, November 14th, and will be a conversation with music promoter Danny Shear and Thelonious Monk's son, T.S. Monk. They'll be talking about the recent Impulse record release of a concert by the great Thelonious Monk that was recorded at Danny Shear's high school when he was just a teenager, because of his amazing genius and his forethought to make that happen. On Sunday, November 22nd, we're going to welcome Kurt Elling with moderators Kate McGarry and Keith Gans. And on Sunday, December 6th, we're going to welcome Regina Carter with moderator jazz vocalist Carla Cook. We're going to invite each of you guys to consider making a financial contribution this evening to the Living Jazz See Us Through campaign. This support will help us reach our financial goal so we can continue to do the work that we really want to do for all of you through 2021. You can make contributions through Venmo by using the handle @LivingJazz or PayPal by using paypal.me/livingjazz. And of course, you can always go to livingjazz.org and make a contribution there. Okay, now, let's introduce our host for the evening. Frank J. Barrett, PhD, is Professor of Management at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. He was a visiting scholar at the Harvard Business School between 2008 and 2010, and again between 2019 and 2020. Frank is an active jazz pianist, and in addition to leading his own trios and quartets, he's traveled extensively in the United States, England, Mexico with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. He's the author of the best-selling book, Yes to the Mess, Surprising Leadership Lessons from Jazz. And currently, Frank is writing a biography of Ellis Marsalis, Wynton's father. So he's going to share a brief passage from his book for us. Let's welcome Frank Barrett.
Thank you, and thanks to Living Jazz for having me. Today we're honored to listen in as Wynton Marsalis and Andre Kimo Stone guests discuss the events and challenges of today and attempt to answer that question, where do we go from here? We'll have roughly 45 minutes of conversation. Afterwards, I'll be back to lead us through a Q&A. So if you have questions for Wynton or Andre, please click on the Q&A button, not on the chat button, but the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and put your questions there. And we'll be able to talk a little bit afterwards. So please, as we're going along, if you have questions, post them there. I would like to read a portion of the foreword of my upcoming book on Ellis. This is Wynton's father. We know that the Marsalis family is the first family of jazz. They've given us 5 world-class musicians. We know them as the first family of jazz, but I think they're really the first family of provocation. To be provocative means that you challenge those around you to be better. It means sometimes you see their potential better than they see themselves. Let me explain. Wynton's grandfather, Ellis Sr., was an entrepreneur who built a hotel in New Orleans, and it was a Green Book hotel. It was the Jim Crow South. African Americans couldn't stay in town, so they had to stay in these special Green Book establishments that were separate and outside the city mainstream. In Ellis Sr.'s neighborhood, there were no playgrounds, no sidewalks, half-finished roads. In order to improve their condition, he felt people in his neighborhood needed to vote, but they felt alienated, and they hadn't even registered. So he would go around the neighborhood and drive African Americans to register to vote, to make sure the neighborhood got better. He sometimes had to cajole them because they were suspicious he was in it for himself. He was making an impact on the white establishment. At one point, there was a bounty on him and his life was threatened. His hotel was smoke bombed twice, but he refused to give up until he got a critical mass of African Americans to register to vote, and he lived to see his neighborhood improve. Ellis Jr., Wynton's father, was also provocative, but in a different way. Sadly, we just lost him this April to COVID, and his 86th birthday would have been next Saturday. He was a master teacher. His teaching style was of continual provocation. He knew, as every teacher knows, that at some point, every student of music comes up against his or her self-limitations, and it's at that point where many give up. But somehow Ellis had a knack for finding that threshold, and he'd pose provocative questions that inspired students to advance to a new level. He challenged his students to reach their potential, but simultaneously supported their growth and development. Sometimes it made him uncomfortable, but he also invited his students, and these were high school students, onto his bandstand to play in professional settings. But even then he was provocative because he would have no rehearsal. He would call tunes on the spot. But his students learned how to listen. That's the way he was provocative. So Wynton comes from a long line of provocateurs. At a time when our country seems so fragile, his message is especially poignant. He challenges us to face our constraints and limitations, the limitations of our collective identity, and take an honest look at how we might enfeeble ourselves. Just listen to the title of some of his longer pieces: Blood on the Fields, From the Plantation to the Penitentiary, and his most recent opera, The Ever Funky Lowdown. The latter is a gut-level challenge to this country to pay attention to how we've created and we maintain a system in which we oppress ourselves. We've locked ourselves in an insidious game in which we think the only way we can feel closer connected is to have an enemy. And in fact, Mr. Game is the main character in the opera. It's a strong provocation. He tells us we need a new mythology, a new identity. He wants us to lift every voice. Like his father and his grandfather before him, he provokes us to wake up from our long sleep, to find our voices and rise to our potential. Finally, Wynton has an antidote, a model for how we could live together collaboratively, and that model is a jazz band improvising. When jazz musicians are improvising, they're living in a more authentic way. They celebrate freedom, but also responsibility to each other. So, how could we as a country live up to our musical heritage, do what jazz musicians do, listen to each other with integrity, honor freedom, and balance it with a sense of responsibility to the larger whole? That's what Wynton challenges us to do. And I'll just end with a personal story. Last fall, I was in Boston. Wynton was playing with his quintet in last November. And after the concert, I went to see him backstage, but I couldn't get in because there were about 20 young musicians carrying their horns standing in line outside of his dressing room. He invited each one of them to come in and play for him. He gave each one very specific feedback about things they could work on to develop to the next level. His band had packed up and left. They had to drive back to New York. Wynton stayed well past midnight. The stage managers were getting frustrated because he wanted to close up and go home, but Wynton kept asking for a few more minutes, and he didn't leave until he listened to each student. In no case did he give a discouraging comment or tell a student that he or she should give up studying music. That's part of provocative competence, a special eye for what a person is in the process of becoming. So I'd like to introduce two very special guests. I'd like to introduce Andre Kimo Stone Guest, writer, cultural critic, and navigator of discussions around culture, race, identity, and community. Andre is the founder and president of Guestworks Incorporated, a management consulting firm whose clients have included Christian McBride, Nicholas Payton, Darren Atwater, and more. He previously served as CEO of the August Wilson Center for African American Culture in Pittsburgh and was vice president and producer for jazz at Lincoln Center in New York. This evening, he's joining us from his home in Louisville, Kentucky, and of course, the great Wynton Marsalis. Thank you, Wynton, for joining us. Thank you, Andre.
How you doing, man?
Good, man. But I want to thank Frank for being kind. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Frank.
Yeah, you're right.
So yeah, we don't want to. I don't want to go into too many pleasantries. Let's just get to it, like we were on the phone or sitting across from one another on many of the conversations we've had over the years, right?
Yes.
So I think it's interesting so people can get a little bit of context of how we know it. I've known you for 27 years. Do you remember how we met? Because it's really important to frame this conversation. Remember the day we met?
I remember.
Yeah, we met. He was on tour with his septet doing the Garth Fagan Griot, New York. Right. And I met him at intermission and told him that my son's name is named after the same person he's named. My son's name is Wynton Kelly Stone Guest. And he's like, oh yeah, okay, that's great. So after the show, he's doing the same thing that Frank just said. He's kissing babies, doing drops for NPR stations, people dealing with people on their horns. So he and his sound engineer and my wife and another couple go back to the hotel where he's staying, and we get something to eat. About an hour later, Wynton comes in, after doing everything that he does, and he sits down and he says, oh yeah, you the cat with the baby named Wynton Kelly. It's like, yeah. So we sit down and I'm like, man, I'm sitting here with Wynton Marsalis, the Wynton Marsalis. We're sitting there, we're breaking bread, having a good time. And then he says something that I vehemently disagreed with. So I had this internal conversation. I said, am I going to say something to this man? It didn't have anything to do with music. It was just, I forgot what it was in particular. But we got into a big argument. And I just met the man. And it became the basis for our relationship over the years. We started out in an argument, disagreeing with each other, but almost 30 years later, you're one of my best friends. So that just lets you know that you don't have to agree with somebody all the time in order to have the basis of a really strong relationship. And I think that's an important point for us to realize today, that we find ourselves, even though we have an election that has brought about a result, the quote unquote people have spoke, but we still have a divided nation in many ways. So we want to talk about where do we go from here? And part of that divide, a big part of that divide is what you and I have talked about all the time, and you talk about in the Ever Funky Lowdown, which is the false binary narrative. As long as when you codify something into either or, one or the other, right? Whether it's this or that, win or lose, black or white, Democrat or Republican, when you can distill things down to two choices, you can ostensibly control both. But part of that is a us and a them, right? And that's a lot of what it is, or where we find ourselves right now, is an us and a them. And tell us about what E, your father, used to say about them. Who are they?
My father was always against dealing with people in a any type of prejudicial fashion. He grew up in strict segregation, so he was 26 before he could ride on the front of a bus, and he would always be angry if he see people all sitting on the back of the bus. He said, "Man, we withdraw this, or people still sit on the back of the bus." But if we were talking to him and we would say them or they all, two things he would say. First of all, he would say all of everybody never does anything. So then when he would get mad at you, he would call you bruh. So if he start calling you bruh, you know he was mad. So he said, "Who is they, bruh? Who is they? Can you tell me exactly who it is? Man, you know them. Who are they? What's their names? Have you met them?" So he would make you be specific. And another thing is if you refer to people by their color or by something that was a what. Of course, since he grew up in that environment, we too, being Southern, we grew up in the same environment, really strictly segregated and ignorant. We always referred to somebody as a white or a black person or this. My father would say, "Don't tell me what somebody is, tell me who they are." Right. So that's where he was coming from philosophically.
Yeah, and so, you know, a lot of where we find ourselves, particularly in the political spectrum, in the wake of COVID and all these other things, we have one group of people saying that things are this way and pointing across and saying that the other people are that way. And both sides have a tendency to think that they are right and the other one is wrong. And so in the human experience, is it possible, right, for one side to be absolutely right and the other side to be absolutely wrong?
Well, I mean, it's possible if you're talking about whether you need to drink water or not. I mean, there's some very fundamental things that, you know,
right.
If you deal with extreme fundamentals, yeah, you can reach a point of saying, you know what, no, this is not right. But when it comes to cultural issues of judgment, no, because of the way perspective works.
Right.
And the question is to try to ride a wave between the energy of different things. And there's so many different things going on at any given time that we don't know. The more complex the thing is and the more component parts it has, the less we can understand it. Sometimes the problem we have is we understand 20 or 30% of something, and then we take that 20, 30% to be the 100%. And then we say, well, everybody knows. Well, that'd be my daddy. Well, who is everybody? Am I part of everybody? Because I don't know. And you know, I think that you know, all of these things are polarities that we have to do this with.
Right.
And we have trouble doing that. And we also have to be prepared to change our minds and understand that things are not fixed in space. Everything is moving and changing all the time. And we're in cycles inside of cycles. We have a tendency to think as things are on a timeline. It's because of how our age works. Like, well, I'm 30, I'm 40, I'm 50. Well, in 1977, 1990, we don't realize that these years are cycles. Our life is a cycle. We're on a globe that's spinning around, and it's in a cycle around the sun that also just reversed its spin. And we're in a galaxy that's spinning. That's why they all are shaped like that. And now they're just spreading out into space. And it's argued whether or not it's going to just continue to expand or contract. That has not been solved yet. But you know, I think cyclical thinking is very difficult, and understanding how to think outside of polarity is also very difficult.
Yeah,
because it feels like you're losing your center when you do that.
Yeah, it's hard for us sometimes to hold two opposing thoughts in our head at the same time. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so for two things that don't seem to go together to be true at the same time.
Right.
So I always tell folks that when you look across and you see somebody that's different than you, that you disagree with, that you think you're 100% and they're 100% wrong, it's actually possible for you both to be right and for you both to be wrong at the same time.
Right. That's exactly right. And then not only is it possible, that is true almost all the time.
Right.
Because other people live their lives in the way they live it, and they're not changing their way of life because of your way of life. Right. So they are, in fact, living the way they live. They believe what they believe, and you are too. So when you get in a room with them, those things are both true. And we try to get to different, and of course, there are higher and higher levels of understanding, more congruent, more harmony. There's things, of course, to learn, but there's nobody who's the baseline. I would always say about integration, you know, I'm all for integration, but whose genes are going to be dominant? Does the integration mean I got to just be quiet and integrate, or does the integration mean you have to be like me? So, you know, these are kind of timeless questions, and we're forced to confront them all the time in our own lives and in ourselves, because many times for us to exhibit personal growth, we identify something we don't like about what we're doing, and we
That's
begin
right.
to work on it, and then over time we get better. Without that type of humility and oversight, it's very difficult to improve, even in something basic as having a conversation with another person.
Right. And in that vein, you sort of hit right on where it is where I want to go. When we talk about where do we go from here, a lot of times when we talk about the us and the they, we project out what it is that we think that somebody else should be doing. But I want to start the conversation of where do we go from here with you and me? And we work concentrically.
Right.
How do we work from where we are outward? Because that's really the way that change ripples. You throw a pebble into a pond and it ripples out concentrically. The point of
Right.
impact is you, and then it goes out. But I want to do it within, because the title, Where Do We Go From Here, sort of, it came from the King's book. The book, and in that book, there's a speech from Riverside Church, where Beyond Vietnam. And I want to read a quote, and I want to juxtapose that against the false binary narrative, and then begin a conversation between the two of us about how we are going to move forward in the post-election, post-Trump era. We as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. This man wrote this 50 some odd years ago, right? And he could be as if he wrote it yesterday. So given what we're facing in terms of that, let's start concentrically. Let's start at the center of that pebble hitting that pond. You start out, and then I'll come talk about some of the things that I feel like I need to do myself.
Well, I feel like just how we use first our own personal education, like we continue to try to educate ourselves and continue to try to be engaged with what's going on, and also to listen and to follow things that you may not agree with. Like I make a point to try to keep up with what younger people are doing. A lot of music and stuff is not something I necessarily like, but I want to hear where they're coming from. But also, I think to be engaged with the culture that we're in and in the community we're in, starting with your family and people that are around you, that you let your feelings be heard, and that you let also people see you learn. Because when you get to be in a senior kind of position in your family or in a community, you're looked at as a teacher or someone who's always talking. It's another thing, because my father could talk a lot, but he also could listen. Mm-hmm. And I think on a very fundamental level, I think I know I could work on the quality of my listening, right. and I think that's what I want to be more dedicated to when I'm talking to people, to be more about listening to what they're saying, writing down books that they say, read those books, and be more proactive about expanding my knowledge base. And then the second thing, because that's internal, to listen more, and externally to be more to occupy more space, whatever that space is, with the absolute truth of what you believe, be it right or wrong, and stand on whatever comes with that. A lot of times you don't say anything. You either get tired when you get to a certain age, you're tired of saying the same thing over and over again. So I think to not get tired and to face that opposition. So right. that's what I think.
From my perspective, someone told me once that you have to earn what it is that you believe in. You shouldn't just accept it because somebody told you. You have to earn it. You got to go through a process of doing that. And you and I have had many discussions or arguments, or whatever you want to call them, disagreements over the years. And it is really about, I've been called a contrarian, called you a contrarian on many occasions, right? We've both been called contrarian.
I am a contrarian. I'm not going to. I'm a contrarian, no question.
But what I've learned to do, what I've learned to do with my contrarian way of thinking is to, when I talk to people, particularly people who agree with me on a lot of things, is to purposely take the position of the other side. Even if I don't agree with it, to actually push myself more so than them to really think about the situation and what it is that we're talking about. As a friend of mine, I do this with him all the time, and it frustrates him. And one of the things that he says to me all the time, he says, "You're not wrong, but," okay? And so what that gets into is, like, we realize that there are things that we do, myself, that I do all the time, that is wrong or that we don't want to do, but we choose not to do them because we can rationalize our way out of it. right? And much of the hard work about dealing with the divide that we have is to not wait for the person to come to you, is to go to the center and wait, right? Don't even look to see if that person's coming towards the center. Because you know, the one thing that's not going to happen, you can guarantee that there won't be any compromise or come together if you don't move, because they sure ain't going to come all the way to you, right? Or if they do, it's a, you know, it's a blessing. So talk about that a little bit, right? In terms of, because you have to negotiate that in the bandstand all the time and dealing with a rhythm section or whatever. It's how do you actively move towards a center of a place of compromise, to go towards the center, even if you don't see people moving in that direction?
Well, I think that's more a matter of listening to them. Like one thing I learned from Billy Higgins, I was playing a gig with Hig, and I noticed it was something different in the feeling of it. And I started to try to change my time I was playing in. And he said, don't change your time. You know, don't change your time. Keep your time where it is, and I'm going to find you, you know. So I think that it's important for us to perceive the value of sharing, you know, perceive the value of sharing and overtaking. Because a lot of times in our mythology, the people who take the most are the heroes, the
Right.
people who have the most resources. And it's hard to understand fundamental concepts. Like on the jazz bandstand, we share the bandstand. And we have an equality because we all are playing. The drums play something, we all have to go with that. If I play fourth trumpet in my orchestra, so I follow the lead trumpet. And when you're soloing, musicians play with you first. Rhythm section wants to play with you if you leave space. If you can leave some space for them to play, great. Now, if you're not going to leave space, if you can play really in the context of the time they're playing in, then they'll love you. Just like you smile at somebody, they're going to probably smile at you. And this other thing is to understand everything is a single organism. Like it's not I am playing, we are all playing. It's like how your conception of the earth could be. The earth is a single organism, and we are a part of that organism.
Right.
Just like a body is composed of mutually independent parts. You're not gonna say, well, okay, take my lungs out. I don't see them, I don't need them. They're integral part of everything. And to understand the value of expending your mental energy on solving larger problems on the bandstand. Like, are we swinging? Not did I play what was right on this G chord? And we need to do that also socially, to expend intellectual capital on larger social problems. Like if we developed a lower class economic ecosystem, then all of a sudden, when you think, I don't want to give people something, or people are not gonna, okay, let's, like if you're over 50 and you like to play basketball, there's an over 50 league that you could play in. You don't just stop playing. So there are different levels of ecosystem that allows people to participate in the economics, and it allows us to perceive communities instead of just neighborhoods. Because a neighborhood is just where people, some group of people living together, but a community has an economic structure, a market, a way of trade, and so I think the bandstand is the exact same way. There are things I could tell you about the bandstand that applies to everything in our way of life, not just our system of government.
Well, let me interject. Our dear friend, mutual dear friend, Marcus the J Master Roberts, he told me a story. I actually wrote a piece about this on my blog, where he says, in Marcus is blind. And so there's a lot of visual cues that are being given on the bandstand that he's not able to partake of. And so, he has very good ears. So when he says that something, when he hears that something goes wrong on the bandstand, he assumes that it's his fault and begins to take corrective measures. Right. And I thought that was one of the most profound things that I've ever heard, because a lot of times people are looking to blame other people when they're in a collective situation, that I'm right and everybody else is wrong, so everybody come to me, right? It's interesting what Higgins said. Higgins was like, I'm willing to come to you, right?
Right. He told me, don't move.
Right.
And he's a great Billy Higgins. And then I started to notice that he changed his ride pattern for every person who played. Now, drummers never do that. So a ride pattern is ting, ting, to ting, ting, to ting, ting. It's the way you feel the time. It's what you play on a ride cymbal. So when the bass goes doom, 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 ting, ting, to ting, ting, and you work on this cymbal beat for your lifetime. And to change the stroke of that cymbal is very difficult. But he would do it, and Marcus, sure. But the thing about Marcus is, what I learned from playing with him is, though he was blind, it was unbelievable how he could describe people in a conversation. Man. If you know a master of deductive reasoning, Marcus Roberts, 4 people could come into a dressing room and he would physically describe those people. And we would all be like, how does this guy, and then he would start to tell you how he deduced it. And when you listen to his deduction,
Right.
you understood just the power of hearing and listening. I mean, I learned more about listening than just watching him. And he would always say, I depend on my hearing to survive. So
Right.
it's not like
Yeah.
I want to hear. I'm surviving by hearing.
Yeah.
And I'm surviving by my memory. And I lie to you not that. I would write a piece of music that was 45 minutes long, and we would be looking at the music. And Marcus Roberts would learn his parts and start correcting us before we played it right, looking at it.
Right.
So he was a phenomena just in the world, just to be around a person with that type of capability and sensitivity and sensibility, and also to know him at the time that he was learning how to play. Because we were young at the same time, and just the way he would practice and study, and the challenges he had to face, and just him describing what he had to do to take his notes to class. He had to go home, transcribe everything in the Braille, relearn his study notes. I mean, Marcus, he was a fount of a lot of communal information, because he was always saying you can't survive without other people. You can't make it without other people. So it's not a matter of tolerating people. What about embracing them?
Yeah.
And then when you embrace people, you start to notice the knowledge and the energy and the things they bring to things. And naturally, y'all are not going to agree on everything. You know,
Right.
y'all are not. That's a natural point. You don't want people just. Me and my little brother were having a conversation. He asked me, could I tell him what was the opposite of dissonance? So we're talking about it. What's the opposite of dissonance? And I said, the opposite of dissonance is unison. It's not harmony.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So we started to riff on that and talk about, we have a problem in our mythology. Are we going to be symbiotic and celebrate that? Or are we going to be predatory? Now the predator is going to get all the resources. It's like the age-old question in the Bible is, why do y'all want a king? This is what the king is going to do. And people say, give us the king.
Yeah.
Whereas
that's the tragedy of the commons.
Yeah, many times the saviors in religions and the people who work in the community and people who are social workers and people who are teachers, people who are blood, sweat, and tearing it out, who just, what is their physical reward for that? Well, they're not being rewarded by the culture. They get a certificate, but they're not going to be paid. They're going to raise money all the time and be constantly in the position of humility, which is fine if you're in that position. But the culture does not celebrate their activity. It patronizes them, and then the people who are rewarded are the ones who can figure out how to sell businesses and make everybody move, or how to bankrupt everybody with some type of financial scheme nobody can understand it, use mathematical equations. Right. And those people many times will be celebrated by the culture and have their name on everything. So for us to redirect our mythology and our understanding of what democracy affords us, I loved Kamala Harris brought Shirley Chisholm out there. You know, I actually remember being 11 years old or something, 12, when Shirley Chisholm got on TV and talked. That was when Black people got on TV. Everybody looked at everybody because they weren't on TV that much. And I remember being that age thinking, man, she's just wasting her time when she was talking. And then she said in her speech, people think this is a waste of time because I'm not gonna, I won't win, and I won't, but I'm doing it for other people. I remember that actually at that time because my mama loved her, and my mama loved Barbara Jordan. So now I look at the age I am now. My mama has passed away, my father's passed away, and I think about the kind of struggles they had in that time and what they wanted to see for the country. And sometimes I would look at a symbolic thing like Kamala Harris being up there and think, man, this is corny, or what does this really mean, or be cynical about it. But I don't feel that now. I feel invigorated by it. And I like the way she brought in all of that history and all of that texture, because I feel like when you start bringing in history and texture about the things that we have done and the sacrifices that people have made, and the way that Black and white people have come together in this country to create another way of looking at the world, though it does not seem to be that which wins, we don't know what the long game is, you know? So
think one of the things when we talk about where we go from here, and you touched on that with Shirley Chisholm and Kamala Harris. Now, one of the things we've talked about a lot over the years is is the importance of intergenerational engagement, right? When you talk about the organism, you talk about your lungs as a part of your body, but there's cells inside your so there's an organism level at every level, and part of that, and there's intergenerational aspects of that organism at all parts of it. And when we get back to the singular aspect, that whatever aspect of what it is that we're looking at, like at how the youth culture, it may look like we have an intergenerational thing going on, but it's everybody celebrating one thing as opposed to everybody bringing their own thing into like a smorgasbord. It's everybody eating the same thing that somebody brought, the young person. So talk about the importance of the intergenerational aspects of what we need to move forward in a nation that can bring us all closer together.
Well, I mean, I think Kamala Harris pointed it out. She's there. Shirley Chisholm was there. Barbara Jordan, they were out there. And now it was interesting hearing Frank talk about my grandfather, because I didn't really know him. So, you know, when I was growing up, just familial dysfunction, like many of us had. And I never try to hide my dysfunction in my upbringing, because I think it's good for just to be, there's a reality to things too. Things don't go as planned. I was sitting in a cab with a great trumpet player, Emery Thompson. He's passed away too. And he was much older than me. He's like maybe my father's age. So he started to tell me, man, I was maybe 35 or 36 years old. He started telling me about my grandfather. He said, man, you didn't know who your grandfather was? I said, not really, man. You know, I've been around my grandfather maybe 4 times in my entire life. And he said, man, that's a damn shame, because your grandfather was bad. And he started to tell me all of what my grandfather did along the lines of what Frank is saying. And my father talked about him, but not a lot. You know, it wasn't like So, yeah, I think the Greeks had it right. You know, they write their books and they say so-and-so, the daughter of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, the blah, blah. You always wonder why they naming all these other people in the story, because this is one story. The entire narrative of human life on earth is one story. It depends on how macro your view is. And I always think about when the first astronauts started to leave Earth, they had a view of stuff that nobody had ever seen. And that was the view of the darkness. And they would always say, we better take care of this. Because if we mess this up, we might be pipe dreaming about going to Mars, but you're going to have a hard time out there. And, you know, the ability to see larger and larger things. It's difficult to develop a macro and macro view, because as your view becomes more macro, you yourself becomes smaller. Then you disappear. And it's almost as if as you become larger spiritually, you disappear physically. And that, of course, is in the teachings of everything from Jesus to Buddha to, you know, the teachings going on. They essentially teach the same spiritual essences.
You know, I want to make sure I get this in before we get to the end, because it's something that you and I have talked about several times. And that is to give some perspective about where we are as the American experiment. I mean, we're really young when we compare ourselves to the rest of the world, culturally speaking, right? Look at Chinese culture, you look at certain European culture, you look at African cultures, we're a baby, right? And so we need to understand ourselves. We don't really think of ourselves as a nation culturally sometimes. We think of ourselves economically and politically. But Harold Cruz, over 50 years ago, gave a quote that really puts this within the context. I'm gonna read this to you, and I want you to talk about this. Harold Cruz says, without a cultural identity that adequately defines himself, the Negro cannot even identify with the American nation as a whole. The fact of the matter is that American whites as a whole are just as much in doubt about their nationality, their cultural identity, as are Negroes. Thus, the problem of the Negro cultural identity is an unsolved problem within the context of American nation that is still in the process of formation. And are we still in the process of formation, culturally speaking? And where do we as whites and blacks fit on that cultural landscape?
Well, you know, that summarizes it. Okay, let's think about it.
Right.
When you have an underclass that you've dehumanized because of their person and not because of their condition you're partially responsible for, you can't accept the revelation from them. Okay, it's just not possible. Y'all are savages, you ignorant, you came from Africa, you had a bone in your nose, you eating people, y'all deserve to be slaves, all of this stuff. Nowhere in the world this most intricate, refined understanding comes from you. So jazz gives you another mythology and hierarchy. There's not a thing that comes from a master. and it reverses masters and slaves. That's why it's such an egalitarian art form. Now, let's think about this. If a civic society is basically have four areas we're going to express ourselves in. First, business, trade. That's we played marbles. We were trading baseball cards, football cards, shirts, whatever it is. We trade. We know how to trade. People trade all over the world. Business, politics. Okay, that way the biggest people are not always beating you up and taking all your stuff. You got to learn that you got to have a political solution. Hey, don't beat me up. What can I do to keep from absorbing this booty whipping? Or somebody who you gonna beat up is talking to you and say, well, man, don't beat me up. Let me such and such and such. Religion. What do we believe? What is our system? What is how do we place ourselves in the universe? And then finally, civics. Civics is health. Civics is arts. Civics is things of the communal good, like the fire department. The big difference between the fire department and the police department. That's why many fire departments are still volunteer. Now, America wants everything to be a business. Man, you can't make money off everything. Your religion is a business now? Okay. Now, instead of believing, you're trying to make money. Okay. Your politics is all a business. Everything is business. So, hey, I know I want to do this with the politics and people got rights, but damn, I got to 2 million, man, I'm gonna get back to you. Okay, then and okay, business is business. The corruption in our business is off the chain because there's no ethics around it. If it made some money, it's okay. Witness the subprime scandal or junk bond. You can go through the list of big scandals we've had that's just ruined the country. Now, let's take finally civics. Man, for some reason, we are a nation that has never understood what civics, the importance of them. That, you know, civics helps us to accommodate the struggle for a more equitable distribution of wealth, power, and agency. Instead, we have a nation of people who want to pay health care twice. They want to pay taxes, and then they want to pay another business that's going to rip them off for their health care. They want to pay education twice. You're going to pay your taxes, and then you're going to pay some institution that's draining your bank account so your kids can get an education. And I've been asking people all the time, they say, well, socialism, Marxism. I have to laugh because me and my buddy Phil Schaap was talking, and Phil Schaap said, man, there's more jazz fans in America than Marxists. People throw the name Marxism around. So I started asking people, what exactly is socialism? What is Marxism? Right. Oh, you know, just people need to be paying. Why do you want to pay twice? You're paying taxes, man. You don't need to pay again. What should your taxes cover? Why is it that our tax base never covers anything for the civic good? That is what creates an absolute imbalance between elites and people with money and everybody else. Make it possible for the playing field to be leveled. And you go through that civics ring, and that's you know, that we need to look at that in our country. That's what Cruz is talking about, because culture is a part of civics.
That's right. The culture is the thing that's going to unite us. That's where the nationalism comes from. Because when you look at other countries, you look at Italy, there's a culture that comes from there. You look at Germany, there's a culture that comes from there. The definition of culture for the United States of America is economic and political. When you start asking people about what the things are, but the things that are actually uniquely cultural that American are disproportionately Negro, African American. Now, whether people like it or not, the soundtrack of the world at this point is hip hop. You don't have to like it; it just is. It's an economic phenomenon and it's a cultural phenomenon. But I don't want to go down that discussion for a second. We're getting down to like less than 5 or 6 minutes. But I do want to ask you something about the Ever Funky Lowdown that we've talked about that isn't talked about a lot. When there's a lot of stuff you cover in there, but I want you to talk specifically about what oppression does to the oppressor.
Well, in the second half of the Ever Funky Lowdown, I explained that whole dynamic.
Right.
Like, I'm tied with you on the plantation, and I go down how the fact that we've had people selling people's families, it showed us how to value people economically. Now it's our family. That's why we have so much pornography in our culture. The fact of all of the kind of raping and everything that went on, it created a type of misogyny that still is with us in the culture. The fact that we segregated groups of people by inauthentic means, anything make you be a Black person, it creates a binary that causes you to divorce yourself from you. The fact that people had their own kids and would disavow them forces you in a relationship with yourself. that you see it's playing out. It plays out right now today. The fact that we had every slave had to be accounted for. They had to have their papers on them. If you didn't have them papers, you wasn't free. Now look how everybody wants to account for you. Man, you have freedom. Everybody got to know your phone is tracking you. We must account for you. You must know. And then finally, the worst thing is that I can get other human beings and force them in a state of peonage and concubinage and exploit their wealth while I sit around or do whatever I can do and don't work for myself, makes me value being not productive above all else. And I love the narrative life of a slave. Frederick Douglass is very clear when he talks about the one overseer who would do all the work with the slaves. He said, boy, this overseer here was very different, because whatever he asked you to do, he would do. Whereas all the other ones, they wasn't doing none of that work. And you look at what's going on today, is that just if you can provide us with some leisure time, we don't care what it costs us. Give us our video game, give us our football game, give us our flat screen TV, give us our drug of choice, give us our music that we can, do our thing to, give us our whatever form of pornographic experience. Man, I can't be bothered with all this stuff, man. What you talking about? I'm busy. I got something I'm doing. And it's through the leisure, the thing of you just not having anything to do with anything that has to do with yourself. So not only through leisure time, but it's also the selfishness implied in that. I own you. Man, you're a human being. I got a whole religion that's already told me don't do that. There's nothing in the whole Judeo-Christian tradition that's telling you it's right to own people. And certainly not in the message of Jesus Christ. Right. And if you, at that time, now you own a person, the egotism of being the master of another person has created a kind of historical relationship with that type of self-absorption and self-involvement. So I tried to lay it out in the Ever Funky in the 5 prizes that were given out, because those prizes don't put you on the left or the right. It puts you squarely in the center of our country.
Right. It's where we actually find ourselves. So we're coming down to the end here, and I want to leave on a high note. And I'm sure most of the audience here are music fans, jazz fans in particular, and in jazz there's the blues. And whether music, the chord structure of the blues or whatever, there's a place in the blues, the turnaround, where that 5 chord comes in, is where you can hear that hope. It's where the song changes. It's like, oh, yes, okay, wow, the turnaround. And so for where we find ourselves, did we get a 5 chord yesterday?
I mean, we got a 5 chord for us,
Right.
But I want to say, I'm going to direct you to this article. It was in the New York Times today called "How Do You Know When a Society is About to Fall Apart?" Okay. Mm-hmm. It was a very interesting article. And it was a guy wrote about a guy named Joseph Tainter. And Joseph Tainter wrote a book called The Collapse of Complex Societies. So everything was about the collapse of societies. But the very last paragraph of this article about how societies collapse, it was doom and gloom. He says, if you close your eyes and open them again, the periodic disintegrations that punctuate our history, all those crumbling ruins begin to fade, and something else comes into focus: willingness, stubbornness, and perhaps the strongest and most essential human trait, adaptability. Perhaps our ability to band together, to respond creatively to new and difficult circumstances is not some tragic secret snare, as Tainter has it, a story that always ends in a sclerotic complexity and collapse. Perhaps it is what we do best. When one way doesn't work, we try another. When one system fails, we build another. We struggle to do things differently, and we push on. As always, we have no other choice. So that's right. That's the blues. No. When I read that at the end of that long article, because it was so negative, like this is what I thought, and that's why I like all my music to end. I don't like it to end with the Gerda Dama room. I want to be like, hey. Yeah. I want to be like, okay. That's what Ali used to say when I make a mistake. I look over at my party would say. Yeah.
I mean, that whole blues aesthetic, the whole thing is, for me, a friend of mine called me yesterday, and she was, she wanted me, you know, she was happy. She wanted to celebrate the victory of Biden. And she was like, yeah, come on, let's scream and holler. And, you know, and I was like, it's great, it's cool. I mean, I voted, it's beautiful. And she said, well, you're not excited enough for me. I got to call somebody else, right? And so
She should have called me.
No, and
You should have called me.
I called her, I talked to her today and I said, listen, I said, it wasn't, I said, I am, if who I am, if I allow something external to me to dictate who I'm going to be in a particular moment, then I lose control of a certain amount of who I am. I want to be the same person no matter who's president. And what I'm going to do, is not going to change.
See that? Well, that's the difference between me and you. She should have called me because I'm still jumping up and down. I ain't felt that good, man. I'm so glad. Well, I don't know what to do, man. I'm glad. I'm more than happy. You know, so I'm gonna do whatever I'm doing, but I'm gonna be a lot happier doing it. Damn, I'm feeling good about it. I'm trying to stay away from the bottle to celebrate. Man, I can't believe it. I'm so happy because at first I thought, oh man, come on. We got to turn the page on that, man. No, I'm happy.
No, without a doubt.
It changed me. She should give her my number, tell her to call me. I'm still hollering and screaming and running up and down my house, making noise, whistling tunes. I play the trumpet for her if she wants.
Yeah, I'm going to be the same dude regardless.
Tell her I'm here. I'm still here celebrating.
I'm not going to tell the folks who she is, but if she should be on there. So if you own her, that was for you.
Yeah, call me. I'm with you. Let's go. Let's play some drums. Man, I'm still looking for something to do. I'm so damn happy.
Well,
that was important for the world to see that. That ain't just us.
Yeah.
That was important. That's important for the world to see a turnaround. It's not even about who it was replaced, even though it is. It's not even about that. It's about no. No. That was a good moment for the world right there.
But don't get me wrong. I mean, but you understand where
it don't mean it's
from.
gonna be different. Hey, as you know, we still got work to do because it's like choosing between who you like, Elvis or George Clooney. Okay, George Clooney let you stand in the scene and he'll talk to you. It don't mean you know. Anyway, let me stop at that point.
That's the end of our time, Brother Squazine. I'm gonna kick it back to Mr. Barrett there, Dr. Barrett.
Well, it's good to see you. You know, I love you. It's great to talk to you.
Wynton, you're not off the hook
brother
yet.
from another mother.
I know that. I know. I'm just telling Dre. I know where I'm at. I'm telling him. I love his son. We should have got Lil Wynton up in here. Boy, his son is, you talk about smart. His son started breaking it down. When I was in the same city with Lil Wynton, I was calling him, taking notes when he talked. What do you think about this, man? I'm interviewing him. I'm not joking about it either. We got to get him up there next time. He knows something.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Wynton, for a wonderful dialogue. And we had some very good questions. We have some time. And by the way, anybody who has a question, put it in the Q&A box, not the chat box, and we'll try and get to it. First question is from Sandy Cressman. In this post-Trump era, when the country is still very divided, what active role do you think musicians can take in continuing to activate folks to organize towards a more just and compassionate country?
I think that we in our music, like we're target marketed with all of our music. So I don't even know when people say musicians, I don't even know what they mean. Now, a lot of musicians they're not even musicians. They make products. And I think stuff is so demographically divided. We just have to, those who have a cultural voice need to speak to the best of our culture. And we need to reach back to the very fundamental building blocks of our thing, like what Kamala Harris did. I loved it when she reached back there for Shirley Chisholm and them, even though she went back further than that. She started talking about the enfranchisement and, you know, everything. I feel like we just need to go to fundamentals because we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. And I think musicians need to deal with music first. Don't fall into the whole kind of victimization of not studying music and dealing with music because you don't have to know anything about music to become popular. Charisma is always a tricky thing, you know. Frank, when you got charisma, you can get over. You don't have to have substance. I mean, you know, and with music now being made by non-musicians, and some of them do interesting things because a non-musician will hear something a musician can't hear. but it's mainly products and formulas and stuff. And then once you could combine it with pornography, like what they do now, and sell it to 11 and 12-year-old kids, man, you got a cocktail that's very difficult to. So I just encourage all the musicians to don't feel like it's hopeless. Like I saw my daddy playing clubs for years with no people in it. He believed in the music, and he taught us about it. So that's all I'm gonna say. Double down on playing with people and making the best music you can, and change the mythology and stop being a part of this kind of exploitation, even though it pays well.
And I like you mentioned that Kamala Harris went back to Shirley Chisholm. You too, you go back to Duke Ellington. You make sure young people know who Duke Ellington is.
Yeah, I try to go back to Jelly Roll. I try to go back. I'll go back to Francis Johnson. You know, I'll go back to Johann Bach. I start to collect all the tradition. I don't just talk about Black people, because we're all connected. You know, I go back to all the great white trumpet players and musicians. And I'm telling my students all the time, hey, so-and-so can play. Check this out. I'm sending them tapes. Check this out. Check out what Buddy Rich played. Look at what Boromir Creel played. Look at this is what Patrick Gilmore did. He played in New Orleans in the 1860s. They sent him down. He played with an integrated band in the South in the 1860s. He was a cornet player. On and on. You know, so it's important for us to deal with the best of our tradition and let us not be segregated.
Yeah, great. Here's a question from Laura Crandall from Boston. One question I have is about your band with Branford. It was such a great band. Why did you guys break up?
Branford and Kenny Kirkland and went to play with Sting. So they couldn't play in two bands.
Okay. Question from Steve Hayward. Our work as musicians is so essentially communal. Improvisation requires being present in the moment. Please help us find hope given COVID so that this intimate bond of improvisation and performance is not put on hold.
Well, it's put on hold because of COVID. So that's the best hope is to accept that it is put on hold. And then the next thing is to do whatever you can, though it's put on hold, to communicate with each other and play in any context. If it's just for a few people, we were laughing in the band. We said, we're going to do these gigs and it's socially distanced. So it's only 3 or 4 people in the club. And we grew up, most of us, maybe 5 or 6 of us have parents who were jazz musicians. You know, 3 or 4 have mother and father jazz musicians. So we laugh, the older of us, and say, well, that's just a normal gig to us. That's what we grew up seeing. So I think you are the hope. And if you want to make it keep going, keep it going. My brother Branford actually sent me an article of Louis Armstrong talking in 1918 about, he sent me a thing of Louis Armstrong talking in 1918 about the Spanish flu. And he was saying, Louis Armstrong was saying everybody around him was sick, but for some reason he could not get it. He was immune to it. So he found himself just taking care of people. Now that was a good 2 or 3 years gone. And when we study the history of Louis Armstrong, I've never even come across that. So that's what I think about this pandemic. It's here and it's gonna stay here and then it's gonna go. And we just have to prepare in this time and keep in touch with each other, get on these Zoom calls. I can see Dre, I haven't seen him, I've been talking to him. I've seen him more in this time than I ever have seen him when I wasn't around him because of these calls. Okay. And, you know.
Question from Gary from San Jose. You talked early in the interview about some young people who are doing music that you don't like. Say more about what you mean. Is there something about the experience and learning and playing jazz that is different from other kinds of music for kids?
Man, I've maintained since the 1980s, all the use of the N-word, all the misogyny, all the kind of pornography is not a mainstream endeavor.
You're talking about hip hop now.
Whatever name it goes by, I don't even care what they call it. You know, because that's not what I'm responding to. I'm not responding to that name. I started talking about it maybe even before it was called that. It's just like pimp movies in the 70s. My mama always hated those movies. Of course, we loved them. A pimp is your hero. She would always say that. This stuff is not yielding good fruit. Now, all of the stuff that's not that, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what is that? The kind of naming people in that way, I'm not a fan of it. And I don't like it. I never liked it. It's been 35 years of not liking it. It doesn't matter. But I have to voice my opinion. And even at this age, I still have the same fire about it. Because I went through schools all through the 90s and I just saw it in our school systems, what happened with our kids with this kind of mythology of wanting the gangsterism and all this crime. No, that's not something to strive for. Should you have that or find it? Yes, but not in the mainstream. So In those ways, I'm talking about that. Now with more elite kind of musics, you know, people want to imitate the European avant-garde. I understand it's provocative, it's taught in schools. That was never the real avant-garde to me. Playing with a group of people and improvising and playing something that could make people dance that was coherent, that's more to me. I didn't get the acceptance of the academy with that point of view, but I still maintain it. There's nothing in my knowledge of music that makes me want to hear my students sound like they're auditioning for some type of grant and going to be playing a Saturday afternoon recital at a college with two people coughing through them playing. And I'm always encouraging them, try to find that original thing in jazz that made people want to dance and made them want to be in love with each other, made them want to make love. And this is human music. Like we got to do that. So, you know, those are things I think about, but I'm not anti-young people because I also know a lot of great younger people who play. And like I was saying, I talked to Andre's son. I literally pull my phone out and take notes on what he's telling me. And he's also a composer and a musician. He assembled a whole course for me to study Afro-American music in the 19th century. And I'm getting into it. So, and I'm not joking when I say it. He's serious as a scholar and as a musician. And a lot of my students I teach at Juilliard, they're very serious. So, but if I talk about what I don't like, it goes into that category. But I want to say there are things I don't like, but there's a lot that I do like. And when I look at a great young musician like Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, she's absolutely a genius and a once in a generation talent, a great composer. Her piece, The Ogress, I just put it on again and again. I just couldn't believe it.
Say it again so people can hear what it is.
Cecile McLaurin-Salvant. She is unbelievable,
Yep.
great
Absolutely.
musician. And you know, Dre, what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Great. Question from Stacy in Berkeley. How do you think the nature of the music business might change given the pandemic, not just temporarily, but maybe change in the long term?
I thought at first they were going to get away from all that profanity and ignorance, but I saw they reasserted themselves. I thought the Black Lives Matter movement was going to cause a higher consciousness, but the ignorance was reasserted right away. So I don't think it's going to change that much. I think that, you know, the minstrel show is going to stay with us at least for the rest of my lifetime. I'm hoping it goes away and I can see it, but I'm only hopeful. The business is not going to change. If you can sell 10, 11, 12 years, just think if I gave you a license to sell dope to a 10 or 11, 12-year-old, man, are you going to not make money? Are you not going to have an audience of victims that you can sit on? That industry has just sat on our younger pre-middle school age kids and prepubescent kids. It's like a blight, and it's like a disease that sets in. And then once you get in high school, you can't survive it. And it's ignorant. And of that group stuff that I'm talking about, which is a lot of it, and it's very popular. I look at it, I see it, I get online, I check it out. I check out what's popular. I talk to younger people. I'm not a fan of it as a mainstream activity. I don't see them changing. It's making too much money, and now they can deliver it in any way. The Ogress is Cecile's piece that I'm talking about. It's not released yet, but when it's released, believe me, you're going to realize something else about Cecile's genius.
Cool. This next question flows right from the last one. What seems to be missing in our discussion here, this is from Tom Gregory in the Bay Area. What seems to be missing in our discussion is the value and role of education, our ability to come together as a society and level the playing field. Are we de-emphasizing the value of education? What can we do for our society to promote education as a tool for change?
Well, you know, civics are a part of education is a part of civics. So I touched on education. The question of when you're teaching is what mythology are you going to teach out of? So my mama used to always say, child, you can get the biggest degree you want. And that degree can say, I am a fool. Or that degree can say, I hate myself. And you'll go all around the world with your degree and showing everybody so proudly. And it says, I hate myself. So yeah, I think that Christina Proenza-Coles has a book called American Founders. And people ask me sometimes about the mythology of America. What would I teach? Christina Proenza-Coles. This book is not easy reading, but it's an unbelievable book that talks about the history of America. Now, in the arts, of course, you take start with Walt Whitman, Winslow Homer, Duke Ellington. And then you could go through the line of great American artists who dealt with issues of national significance you could speak with impunity any way you want in the United States of America. We're not teaching any kids about any of that. We're teaching them to be artistically and culturally to be victims of an economic system. So, you know, and when I made the point about paying twice for education, is you pay taxes. Education should be free. Now you paid your taxes, and I'm not going to take care of your education. I'm going to make you pay again, and you're going to say, please let these corporations exploit me. Then there's going to be a big fight over how much candy can I put in a school. It's like everything is a business. Toilet paper is a damn business. You know, well, it was just the toilet paper we have to use because my cousin's company has it's off the chain. We have to all be more vigilant about stuff. I know, to go to what Andre asked me first, I need to be more vigilant myself. And I need to be much more forceful about just speaking about when you make everything be a business, anything in your civics wrong is going to struggle. And education is. Somebody get an education in a democracy that requires people to be educated, and they have $650,000 in debt. It's ridiculous.
And if you think about the vigilance in terms of, it's so difficult for us to sacrifice and opt out. Like, we get upset about things that we don't like, something like the NFL and head injuries, and we think somebody should do about that. Well, if you really are upset about it, the first thing you should do is turn it off. Don't pay attention to the advertisers and go subconsciously buy something from one of those advertisers that's perpetuating the thing that you're upset about. We don't want to sacrifice. We don't, we don't want to put anything out that we don't want to do. You know, why should I be inconvenienced?
Here you go attacking the NFL, man. You see how you come on, I told you about that. I told you to stop doing that. But you know, that's you can't help yourself.
Well, I don't watch it.
Question from Jack. Wynton.
This guy, he come up here with that.
Okay. Question from Jack. Wynton, you said you were never afraid to name your dysfunction. Can you say more about that? How can people incorporate this behavior to engage with people easier and to grow in their own maturity and spiritual awareness?
We don't have enough time for him to go into his dysfunction.
Yeah, he's right about that. He ain't lying about that. But we struggle, man. You know, we struggle. We struggle out here in life. You know, I have kids. I have not been married. My mother and father had a rough time. You know, we didn't live like Leave It to Beaver. They were struggling. They struggled a lot, and people around us were struggling. And it's not. My daddy used to always say, "Hey, this is not Disney World." And when you're given the impression that it's Disney World and everything is, you know, you're not ready to deal with what's out here, because what's out here can be rough. I remember when all the cats in my neighborhood was going to take boxing. So everybody said, man, we're going to take boxing. So some reason I had to miss, but I wanted to box too. They came back the next day, and man, everybody had their nose broken. I said, man, what happened to y'all? And they say the dude who was teaching them went down the line, breaking people's noses. And he told them, this is what this is out here. So I was kind of laughing at them. And I asked my one boy that we call Pluky, I said, what happened to you, man? He said, bro, I was at the end of the line and I really didn't want to take mine. But when they took theirs, I figured I got to take mine too. You know, man, we laughed about that for years, boy. But just, you know, when you let people know what's out here.
In the second part of the question, how is coming to terms with your own dysfunction, how does that help in your own spiritual development?
Well, it helps you put yourself in a context that's more realistic.
Right.
It's like, you know, I asked a friend of mine who had gone to Afghanistan to fight, and he came back after a tour of duty, and he was fighting. I said, what did you learn? He said, you know what I learned, man? He said, you know all them lies you tell yourself about who you are, that you lie to yourself so much about that you start to believe it over time and you forget what's actually true? Those lies will get you killed. So what I learned was to stay inside of who I actually was and get in my own personal lane and make sure I could survive what I had to deal with by not doing stupid things based on a self-mythology that was not real. Mm-hmm. So I always like to go to his thing, because just like what this pandemic has taught all of us, including Donald Trump, whoever it is. If you foolishly think that this pandemic is going to go along with what you're saying it is, you made a mistake. And it's going to show you, because it doesn't care.
And the
It's-
culture is set up in such a way that it wants you to lie to yourself about who you are, because they can sell you something to actually make you that.
Right. In the belief that everything is everything. Like, it doesn't matter whether you read the Constitution. What difference does it make whether you read the Bible? I talk to my students all the time, and it's always like, what difference does it make coming out of their mouth? What difference does it make? Well, what does it matter? Well, if it don't matter, drop out.
You're not wrong, but
don't study. Don't stop studying tomorrow. Don't show back up here if it doesn't matter, because I can't make it matter to you. I had another little kid. Another common thing in America is disrespecting one's parents. On a call of 40 of us say, well, I want to do everything the opposite of what my parents did. I don't agree with anything they did. And, it's kind of like a co-signature of it. I said, well, I want you to really do that. Start tomorrow by giving them back every dime they spent on you. And then the next 15 years, spend giving them back the time they spent on you. And then at that point, 15 years from now, if I'm still alive, let's talk about how that worked out for you.
Oh, jeez. That's good. We have a question. What do you think of this quote by Paul Robeson? As an artist, I come to sing, but as a citizen, I will always speak for peace, and no one can silence me in this.
I love him. I stayed up one night not too long ago looking at, I saw Paul Robeson singing to some Scottish miners. Damn, this Paul Robeson singing Scottish songs. Then I started looking at all the different cultures he had been in. I saw him in Australia singing. I saw him in different places singing people's folk songs. Paul Robeson had also mapped a lot of the folk songs in the world and the connections between them. So I absolutely agree with him and what he stood for and who he was. He was such a dynamic and powerful person. And he did so much with his platform to create change. I mean, I absolutely love him. Dizzy really loved Dizzy Gillespie. Couldn't stop talking about Paul Robeson.
This is our last question from Jules Cragen. America was known at its best as a melting pot of cultures. Is it possible to build a shared experience that is based upon the strength of the multitude of cultures that make us up as opposed to money?
Well, America already has a culture. It's like Italians have a culture. Their culture has changes. There are things that come into it, but they have a baseline. It's in their food, it's in their opera, it's in their art, it's in their way of singing, a way of singing songs, and their way of playing marches and their traditions. That is in there. America already has a culture. It wasn't the culture we wanted. So we had to whitewash the culture to make all the heroes be a certain type of person, even when those heroes themselves were saying, well, we got that from these people. We got that. And it's not like you have to denigrate a great white musician to celebrate a great black musician. But in America, you almost do. Well, in America, you do have to do it because the black ones are always pushed down lower than who they are. Like, where are you going to put Duke Ellington in a culture in which Elvis is the king? Man, you can't even find a spot for Duke.
Yeah.
But, Wynton, it's like what you said about your friend from Afghanistan. He was who he was. He just needed to come to grips with it. So it's not a matter of you coming to be something. You are.
Right.
It's just that we are. We just haven't come to grips with it.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean? We haven't
You're
acknowledged
right.
what it is.
That's what Christina Proenza-Coles' book breaks down. Now, it's an academic book, so you got to read it. Like, it's not easy reading, but it's worth reading because she's dealing with a lot of research and facts, and she breaks down stuff that's very fundamental and true.
Tell us the title of that book one more time.
American Founders.
Great.
Christina Proenza-Coles is the lady's name. It's a fantastic book.
I just want to say thank you so much, Wynton, for joining us. I know how busy your life is, and thank you for taking time out to be with us. I hope at some point you get to know this organization, Living Jazz. If you're ever on the West Coast out here, we would love to host you.
Well, I would love to be. I love it. I love the name, and I love see us through the campaign. I want y'all to contribute to that campaign. If you got some, I know your money is hard earned, but we got to contribute to our organizations. We need it. This is a struggling time, and I love the name.
And you'd be proud. You'd be very proud of the things they do.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. I want to be out there with y'all.
Thanks so much.
Proud.
It's great to see you. Andre, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Wynton. Man, it's a pleasure. This is something that we do anyway. We just got people watching us doing it. So
yeah.
Appreciate
Thank you, man.
Love you with all my heart, man. You're a brother from another mother.
Yeah.
And if you all are so inclined, go to my website, educated-guesses.com, and check out. I've actually written quite a few pieces on Wynton, and I have a piece that breaks down his ever funky lowdown. It's long, but I think it gets to an essence of what the piece is.
Look, it just remind me of Stanley Crouch would always say, when you gonna stop writing all these long, sad, boring pieces?
The piece is long, so I would think it'd only be fitting that I write something long for it, right? I can't give it like 500 words. So, all right. So those are my final words. I want to kick it back to the folks that live in jazz, and thank you all so much for allowing me and giving me the opportunity to talk to my dear friend here at a bar.
Yeah, you're right. Man, you know I love you. Stacy gonna take it away. I see my man Charles Ellison wrote in here, great trumpet player from Montreal. I love him. That's my brother. He can play. Okay. Okay, Stacy. Yeah, you're right.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I don't want it to end. This has meant a lot to me personally, and I know it's meant a lot to everybody that's listening. You've addressed some very relevant topics and points for us, and I know we all need inspiration, especially for those of us who are carrying the torch for jazz and carrying the torch for what we know that jazz can do for society and humanity. And you represent that, both of you, and I'm just so grateful. So let's thank Wynton Marsalis for joining us, Andre Kimo Stone Guess, and Frank Barrett for just leading an amazing and very deep and powerful conversation. We want to thank everyone who's joined us this evening, both locally and actually throughout the world. We're so honored that you were here with us, not just to hear these amazing people, but also to find out about Living Jazz. Please stick with us, learn more about this organization here in the Bay Area. I can't wait to see all of you. You're all invited to our next call and response event. That will be Saturday, November 14th, Monk Talks Monk, with T.S. Monk and music producer, promoter Danny Shear, talking about this amazing recording that was just released on Impulse Records that was recorded when Danny was just a teenager at Palo Alto High School. So we're looking forward to that. Then on Sunday, November 22nd, we have Kurt Elling, one of my favorite jazz vocalists, with also an amazing vocalist, Kate McGarry, and her husband, guitarist Keith Gantz. And then on Sunday, December 6th, we will have Regina Carter with the great jazz vocalist Carla Cook. So we're looking forward to seeing all of you. And again, as Wynton said for us, thank you so much. Please support Living Jazz. Please consider making a financial contribution. And again, we love you all. We wish the best for all of you and our country in this crazy time. And we bid you a good night. Thank you very much.
Right now.
Thank you.